Donald Trump tweets support for blockade imposed on Qatar. Donald Trump has appeared to take credit for the diplomatic and economic blockade imposed on Qatar by its neighbors in the worst crisis to hit the Gulf states in 30 years, saying that all the evidence pointed to the state funding terrorism. The president's remarks on Tuesday will come as shock to Qatar, which regarded itself as an ally to the US and its home to 10,000 US troops, and will delight Saudi Arabia, which until recently had been fighting off claims in Washington that Riyadh was the chief sponsor of terrorism. In series of tweets, Trump wrote, "During my recent trip to the Middle East, I stated that there can no longer be funding of radical ideology. Leaders pointed to Qatar. Look." He continued, "So good to see that Saudi Arabia visit with the king and 50 countries already paying off." They said they would take a hard line on funding extremism, and all reference was pointing to Qatar. Perhaps this will be the beginning of the end to all horror of terrorism. It was his first intervention in the crisis, and although it does not endorse the diplomatic boycott of Qatar, runs counter to the tone of other administration officials calling for compromise and reconciliation. Both the US Defense Secretary James Mattis and Secretary of State Rex Tillerson have called for calm. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt announced on Monday they were in cutting off air, sea, and land links with Qatar and breaking off all diplomatic relations, claiming it has been supporting extremists, developing ties with Iran, and acting as a safe harbor for key figure in Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood. Qatar is also home to the US military's regional headquarters in Al Udeid Air Base, which Qatar spent more than $1 billion building and has been used to stage attacks against ISIS in Syria and Iraq. Qatar regards itself as a key ally of the US, but its independent stance on foreign policy has increasingly angered the UAE and Saudi Arabia. It moved to defuse the blockade on Tuesday, saying it was willing to work with the mediators to try to end up the dispute, as Kuwait's Emir Sheikh Sabir Al-Ahmed Al-Jabah Al-Sabah said he would travel to Saudi Arabia for talks with the King Salman, but in saying that the relationship will not be repaired easily. Anwar Gargash, the United Arab Emirates foreign minister, said that there would be no concessions until there was a clear plan setting out the steps Qatar would take to revise its foreign policies. Qatar is vulnerable to a blockade since it's heavily dependent on food imports across its land borders with Saudi Arabia. Its position as a commercial airline hub is also threatened. The anti-Qatar alliance is determined to drive a hard bargain, including an end to Qatar's soft pedaling on Iran, closure of some of its independent media networks including Al Jazeera, and the ejection from Doha of leading figures in the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas. Fueling the hard line against Qatar is fury over its alleged payment in April of $650 million ransom for the release of 26 members of Qatari royal party who were kidnapped in December 2015 while on a falcon hunt in southern Iraq. Diplomats pointed to Trump's support of Saudi Arabia as a more likely immediate cause of the move to break off trade and diplomatic relationship with Qatar, rather than ransom paid for the release of Qatari royal. But the episode could be seen as a symbolic of a lack of seriousness come leaders in the region show in defeating terrorist groups. The 26 Qataris, including 11 members of the ruling Al Thani royal family, had gone on a falcon hunting trip when they were kidnapped from a desert camp in Mutanna province, southern Iraq, by a 100-strong armed group from the Iraqi Shia militia Kataib Hezbollah. Complex year-long negotiations for the release of the group involved Iran, Iraq, the Lebanese Shia militants Hezbollah, and other, including the Syrian group Azhar al-Sham. The Iranian foreign minister reportedly visited Doha in March to discuss the deal. Qatar's Emir Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani personally greeted the men when they arrived in Doha on a private jet from Baghdad in April. The precise terms of their release has never been published, but it's believed Kataib Hezbollah received $500 million, $30 million went to Azhar al-Sham, a similar amount to the Syrian Al-Qaeda affiliate formerly known as the Nusra Front, and the specified sum to Hezbollah. the Lebanese Shia militia. The Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi furiously claimed that the deal has been done without Iraqi government involvement or approval. Trump's apparent sympathy for the Saudi-led blockade marks the dramatic turnarounds from his position 2 weeks ago when he met Qatari Emir in Riyadh, saying a photo call, "We are friends, we have been friends for a long time now," indirectly, adding our relationship is extremely good. He said it was an honor to be with the Emir and welcome to the fact that Qatar was planning to purchase some beautiful US military equipment, which would mean job security and security in the US. Saudi Arabia and the UAE nevertheless believe they have been the backing of the Trump administration for their approach, and by portraying Qatar as uniquely culpable in the funding of extremist groups, have caught the ear of key right-wing players in the Washington. Qatar itself feels that the victim of an orchestrated and well-planned operation designed to end its independent foreign policy, which has exploited renewed US support for Saudi Arabia. As the blockade began to be imposed on Qatar, queued up to 25 people deep formed in the Carrefour supermarkets in Doha City Center Mall, one of the busiest shopping areas in the capital. Shoppers piled trolleys and baskets high, and shelves were stripped of essentials such as milk, rice, and chicken. Among the hundreds of shoppers desperately searching for staple good was Azir, a Sri Lankan who went to the store. Was a relative called him for home after watching the news on television. "I was asleep. My family found me and woke up me from Sri Lanka. He said I came because of the crisis." Ernest from Lebanon said he knew he had go shopping because other woods rushed to the stores. "It's a cycle of panic and I needed to get pasta." He said he stopped with his young family pushing 2 trolleys. Apart from the lack of foods in shops, Qatar Airways, one of the region's major long-haul carriers, was forced to suspend all flights to Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt and Bahrain until further notice on its website. The carrier said that suspension of flights would take effect on Tuesday and customers were being offered a refund. The route between Doha and Dubai is popular with business passengers, and both are major transit hubs for travelers between Asia and Europe. Flight Radar 24, an airplane tracking website, said Qatar Airways flights had already been affected. Many of Qatar Airways flights to southern Europe and Africa pass through Saudi Arabia. It says that the flights to Europe will most likely be rerouted through Iran and Turkey. The block on Saudis visiting Qatar will also hit its service and tourism sector. Saudis usually flock to Qatar on holiday during Eid al-Fitr and the end of the Muslim holy fasting month of Ramadan. "This is very bad news, said Rayhan, a cab driver originally from India. All Saudis come here for Eid." Qatar has denied funding extremists through Western officials have accused is following or even encouraging funding of Sunni extremists such as Al-Qaeda's branch in Syria. Suburbs of Qatar, however, claim with a stern diplomat privately come to the presence of Hamas figures in Doha, seeing it's a base for talks, and do not regard Qatar as more responsible for extremist funding than Saudi Arabia. Peter Salisbury, Middle East senior research fellow at the Chatham House think tank, said Trump's tweets made him feel for the first time we may be moving towards the possibility where a demand can be made for a game change on way or another in Qatar. He said the Saudi leaders believe the relationship with Trump allowed them to make a big move against USLA, such as Qatar, with the aim of restoring Saudi Arabia as the principal power in the region. He pointed to the fact that UAE-backed media were highlighting dissident members of the royal family forming a Qatar Liberation Front will